Good morning and then welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a news update that would normally be appended to the frontline update, but there's too much going on in both spheres, so I'm separating it out again. So let's quickly run through the sort of overnight news, what's been going on. We'll go first to usually start the Ukrainian figures for Russian losses from the day before. Remember all the caveats, inaccurate propaganda. Russia don't produce the same sort of figures. However, they are indicative, and there are some interesting figures on here again. So 780 liquidated personnel, all the problems with what liquidated means, whether it's wounded or taken out of the battlefield or killed, is up for debate still. 780 is slightly above average, so that's a fairly challenging day for the Russians, but it's some of these other figures that are pretty staggering. 14 tanks, that's a bad day for the Russians. 27 APCs. There were 23 yesterday, which means in 2 days they've lost 50 APCs. So if that's an actual, genuine figure, that is just astonishing. And it's certainly indicative of a couple of bad days for the Russians. And there have been some piece of footage coming out from all over the front line of quite a bit of armored equipment being taken out. 15 artillery systems, 2 MLRS. That's again a high number. 15 a piece of artillery is big, and that's artillery that can't fire back. There's claims that Russia have just huge amounts of artillery systems, not a problem. It's the ammunition they're short on, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I think still artillery systems is genuinely a problem for them. If they keep getting hit in those numbers, 2 aircraft, 1 helicopter, just incredible. However, I have to say, and as no report says here, in all honesty, I want to see proof of recent claims, for example, aircraft and helicopters. Otherwise, I'm feeling this is either exaggerated or untrue. They have lost, the Russians, as according to these figures, quite a significant number of aircraft over the last week. It seems that most days there's either one, sometimes, I think, what was it? There were 3 helicopters the other day, a couple of fixed wing aircraft, or something that, some days they're really high. And that's a lot of damage being done to the Air Force capacity and capability, because it's about training these pilots and crew members, whether they are being lost with these planes, whether it's happening at all. I really would love some confirmation of that, visual confirmation, because there just has been none. But this last week, if it's true, has been a really bad week for the Russian VKS, the Russian Air Force. 6 drones, and actually you can add another 24 to that, as I'll explain in a second. 19 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 1 piece of special equipment. That is pretty bad day for the Russians, if that is anywhere near true. And I think it probably has a good deal of truth in it, just quite how much I don't know. Right. So 24 hours ago, one of the huge Antonov 26 cargo planes Russia owns landed at Taganrog Air Base. It's just 50 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, so presumably a new batch of drones was on that flight. And speaking of drones, so they are possibly getting shipments of drones from Iran. Well, it appears that has basically come to fruition in a night of a huge amount of threat from the air. So first of all, we had 24 drones were sent over, and I believe all 24 were shot down. Um, and that was 100% ratio, which appears to be what's going on with the drones at the moment. Now, I was guessing that the drones were going to be sent across first to try and use up some of that air defense, possibly find some weaknesses in the air defense, even though they're almost like sacrificial. Um, Dnipro did get, I think, hit with one of those drones. It appears from it being shot down and then exploding rather than it finding a target. So it fell in an industrial enterprise. There were no victims, and there's the evidence of that happening. Fire broke out in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro following Russian strikes. So those are the drones. And then we earlier this morning had at least one wave of 30 plus missiles. So that's not very many. So there might possibly be a second wave going on now. It's all, news is coming thick and fast, but this was over Kherson. Pretty rapid moving missile. They are at the moment causing some trouble around Ukraine. Odessa, I believe, was hit. Two critical energy infrastructure objects in the Odessa Oblast were damaged as a result of Russian missile strikes this morning. And I think that has caused some energy blackouts in Odessa. So that is a bit of a challenge. There are missiles flying all over the place. News coming in that some are being shot down. Don't know that many are, how many are finding their targets. I think one possibly was shot down in the Dnipro region of Kiev. Mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, confirms explosions in the Dnipro district of the capital. Reports of the second blast on the left bank. So it is all happening at the moment. I'll let you know later on today what the damage is on that front. So just moving on. I mean, this has been expected for some time because the boats were out, the ships were out in the Black Sea, and you had consistent news of bombers taking off from airports, air bases in Russia, and so everyone was expecting this. Zelensky has discussed with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg the necessary steps for Ukraine's further integration into the alliance and the supply of new types of weapons, in particular about long-range missiles. Everyone's talking about this. It's like, okay, tanks are done. We've got tanks, and that's now an open door for more tanks going forward. Now the next sort of line to cross is the ranged missiles, which Ukraine has been asking for ages. Everyone has, just waiting for that to happen. So we hope it does at some point soon. Germany is continuing to come up with the goods. They've obviously freed the Leopards. Now they're handing over 10,000 Starlink terminals to Ukraine next month, says the Minister of Digital Transformation, Fedorov. It's good news. Bayraktar, the drone, or Baykar, the company that makes a Bayraktar drones, the TB2 drone, sorry, has done so well out of this war. The marketing of the Bayraktar has been insane. It's particularly at the beginning of the war, and that generated a lot of business for them. Anyway, they've handed over two TB2 drones free of charge to help the Ukrainian armed forces to protect itself against the Russians. In fact, I think they've already drawn up the plans for a factory to be built in Ukraine, which is pretty risky. But yeah, the Bayraktar factory apparently will get the go ahead in Ukraine. Slovakia is ready to immediately send 30 T-72 tanks to Ukraine if it can get Western tanks in return. I mean, there's a lot of opportunism going on here. There's a great opportunity for these Eastern European nations that have a lot of old Soviet gear to go, yep, we can give them to Ukraine and they know how to use them and they'll be happy with them. But we definitely need a good deal on Western tanks. So, yeah. It's also ready to discuss the transfer of MiG-29s to Ukraine. And I assume that would be about backfilling with Western aircraft as well. So that's really good news for Ukraine from Slovakia's point of view. I hope that they get that kit over there. Both useful, the T-72s and the MiG-29s. Training of Ukrainian soldiers to work on the German Leopard 2 tanks may begin in late January, early February, said the Bundeswehr representative yesterday. The delivery of the first two A6 tanks can be done within 3 months from now. So January, February, March, April, we're looking at the end of April at the earliest, I would have thought, before these tanks are seeing the front lines and you've got that spring offensive taking place. And speaking of what's been given, in fact, you can add a few to these. I think Canada have now said they're sending, is it 4 Leopards as well? You've got the USA, 31 Abrams, 14 Challenger 2s from the UK, Netherlands, 18 Leopards, Poland, 14, Germany, 14, Norway, 8. A bunch of others have been semi-confirmed, just not quite sure exactly what the final numbers are. At least 96 tanks are thought to be going, but probably around 130 to 140. in total in the first batch, says Visegrad 24. And Spain joins the European plan for the supply of Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Now, there's been a lot of talk about really how many and in what condition these are going to be. The government has taken a decision to that effect. El País reports. To later today, the Spanish MOD confirmed that Spain has 53 2A4 tanks, of which 20 are viable for direct transfer. So these are the ones that are in Spanish warehouses at the moment, and they're generally not in very good nick, and they might be up for cannibalization. But 20 are certainly viable for direct transfer, and if Spain can help out with that, that'd be absolutely fantastic. Now, this has been met with absolute excoriation from the Russian propagandists, as you can imagine. Of all major European countries, Germany was long seen in Moscow as the most cultivated and co opted. And this cut across party lines. SPD and CDU shared a similar approach to Putin. Expect this sulphurous response to only grow in the coming days, says Michael Weiss. So Steve Rosenberg has said for the BBC, the anti-Western rhetoric is off the scale here. Russian TV's Solovyov, who I've played you a number of times, tonight on his talk show, quote, the Fourth Reich has declared war on Russia. They're supplying Ukraine with tanks. Who can possibly deny that after this, Berlin is a legitimate target? Wow. So that is really ramping up the parenthesis. Sorry, the ramping up the rhetoric. Sorry, I was reading the word parenthesis down there. As you would expect, whether this is empty hot air sort of rhetoric, or whether this is dangerous escalation of the conflict from the Russians will be seen. But again, we return to the point that where can Russia go? Where can they escalate this? They've only got biological weapons and nuclear weapons, and if that happens, it's game over. It's game over Russia, and they know that. And so it is one of those. It's that kind of I guess, empty brinkmanship where, you know, the West is keeping on pushing and the Russia says, yeah, but nuclear, yeah, but nuclear, yeah, but nuclear. And they're never willing to go there, which is a good thing, obviously. But that was what was holding so many people back, I think. And it was this realization from the West. Maybe there's some intel that's gone around saying, look, this is what happened, and Russia knows it. You know, Putin knows it. Apparently, it's been communicated very clearly to him what would happen if nuclear was used, and maybe that's been communicated to a lot of nations to say by the US and others to say, don't worry about the nuclear. We're fairly sure it's not going to happen because X, Y, and Z reasons. And so everyone's kind of relaxed a little bit and gone, okay, let's do the tanks. And if we all do it together, you know, the great thing is that the leopards, so many nations use the leopards, they all chip in together. It's not just one nation that's gonna be for the high jump as far as Russia's concerned. Yes, they are gonna concentrate on Germany here, but everyone is pulling together on this one. Um, Bad news for the Russians again. I would have thought Turkish NTV channel reported that yesterday evening Russian forces struck a Turkish flagged ship, Tulsa, that was stationed in the port of Kherson in southern Ukraine. So this is a grain ship. As a result of the strike, the vessel caught fire. There were no casualties as nobody was on board at the time. So this is not going to be good for Turkish-Russian relationships. If their own corporate entities or business entities are being hit in Kherson, yeah. Moscow media is delighted that T-14 Armata will be deployed. So this, and I talked to you about this yesterday, and the BBC, sorry, not BBC, British UK intelligence has suggested that actually the troops on the front aren't really too excited about these because they've got a bit of a bad rep going on. Well, Moscow media is delighted that T-14 Armata will be deployed. Fewer than 100 are in existence, and maybe a dozen or more are actually operational, and no more, says Michael Clark, who's a great analyst. Almost no aspect of this tank works reliably. Troops seem to hate it, and Darth Putin, who's always funny to follow, posted this video of one of the parades in Russia. This must be so embarrassing. I've not seen this before, but this is obviously one of the Moscow parades where that T-14 Armata, look at our brand new tank. It's an amazing tank. And it literally is not budging anywhere. It can't be moved by this. That must have been so embarrassing. In response to Leopards and Abrams, Russia will deploy Armata tank, which will prevent any retreat as it can't move. Darth Putin. Good. Sorry. Shashank Joshi reports that he's the defense correspondent for The Economist, some senior Russian military officials, this is a quote, have been overheard in recent weeks discussing the possibility of trying to capture the northeastern city of Kharkiv, according to people familiar with conversations intercepted by Western and Ukrainian intelligence. Just to remind you where Kharkiv is, that is this city up here. There's been all this talk about attacks from the north. It looks like Belarus really has been training up a lot of people in the first Guard Tanks Army um, who were hit badly, and maybe there's a lot of forces up there genuinely for training rather than for an actual attack. But that could still be on the cards. It could be the Sumy Kharkiv area. I if you had to attack from the north, I would guess probably somewhere like around here would be more sensible than right up here, completely away from it all. That's my guess anyway, but goodness me, I'm not sure even that's particularly sensible. So that could be on the cards. This has been doing the rounds. There's been an intercept that indicates that all positions are. There's no context and no additional context that's provided, unfortunately. But this has been released as a kind of snippet from someone. So again, this could be propaganda. Be warned. Hello. So what's happening with ammunition replenishment? Did the Stashina bring the ammunition? Look, for all positions and order, strict conservation of ammunition. He repeats that. For all positions, strict conservation of ammunition. So there could well be a shortage of ammunition if that is to be trusted. Is it to be trusted? Don't know. It's kind of out the blue, but it fits in with lots of other indications we are seeing along the Russian front line. And talking about challenges, the next mass mobilization is planned for the end of February. At the same time, from February the 1st, all repair and construction work at budget enterprises and institutions will be stopped. This is according to Flash News. And all planned funds will be redirected to ensure armed aggression against Ukraine. Will we see a really proper, hardcore war footing government approach whereby everything is going towards a war? We're gonna have a full mass mobilization. We're going to put the economy almost entirely towards a war efforts, etc., etc., etc. Will that happen? I don't know, but there is also talk that will be too late. I can't remember where I saw it, but the amount of time it will take to mobilize the troops and then to train them, these guys will not be able to help with the spring offensive if that is, still on the cards for the Russians. So it might well be too late. Okay, television audiences in Crimea and Belgrade, and bear in mind it was his 45th birthday yesterday, which is probably why you're seeing the saturation bombing attacks today, or going through last night. So TV audiences in Crimea and Belgrade region saw a speech from Ukrainian President Zelensky today when turning onto different Russian TV networks. Russian officials blame the Americans for giving Ukrainian intelligence agencies the hijacking tech. So this is great. This is part of the information war, and I fully condone this kind of stuff. And hopefully, what you have is so many people have this completely negative view of Ukrainians and the Ukrainian leader that is distorted by the disinformation spread by Russian state networks and the Russian narrative being put out there. They need to see Zelensky speak for himself and maybe give them a chance to judge more independently. The last thing I'm going to share with you, this is part 2 of a lengthy report from Kenneth Gregg. So this is the Swedish, or is it Finnish, guy on the front, somewhere around Ukraine. I think he's been in various places and sometimes makes claims about what's going on front lines, but he's not necessarily at all those front lines, because quite often he does a whole synopsis of what's going on everywhere. Is this part of the propaganda? Is this just some guy genuinely giving you what he knows? I don't know, but often has some really interesting nuggets thrown in there. I claimed yesterday, he says, that the war is basically over by midsummer. I promise to justify that line of thought, so you're welcome. So he's making this huge claim that actually things are not looking good for the Russians, and the war's going to be over um, by summer. Um, uh, we shall see whether that's true. Uh, the Russians are starting to have problems with maintenance on the front lines. Orders have been intercepted with Russian military command to all units to save ammunition. Without ammunition, another maintenance and offensive is doomed. Russians are infighting since Wagner has been the leader in recent attacks and has been forced into subservience by the Ministry of Defense. Things are boiling over for them. This is evident in the new frenzied attacks they are now making on Bakhmut, where they eventually will reduce the force to the point where they are no longer fit to fight. The transfer of 100,000 men from offensive to defensive fighting, which will again thin them out considerably, leaves a maximum of 150,000 fresh new men, which is certainly not enough for an offensive. For that, you need at least 300,000 more, which leads to the next point. The big mobilization in Russia has not even started. So, this is the point I was making before. You need at least 2 months to mobilize and another 2 months to train the new mobilized troops, that is. Time has run out. We finally get the heavy weapons we asked for, and they come quickly. Besides, we've already had training in using them. So most were sent directly to the front, and then a large offensive brigade is formed. We have already prepared the reserves, and now are bringing in people to be trained and to fill those reserved places. Time-wise, we have already advanced a long way, so we'll have our ranks ready by early April. Then it depends on the weather. So he's basically saying that the Ukrainians will be ready for a big offensive in April, and it doesn't look like the Russians will. They just don't have enough time to sort themselves out. They've got maintenance problems, ammunition problems, and they haven't started the next wave of mass mobilization. He continues, and I find this interesting. Our own arms industry, mainly on the drone side, has new weapons ready for production, and I've seen evidence of this. There's been some interesting footage of new Ukrainian drone manufacture. Our own long-range missiles are also getting ready for mass production. Now, this is probably the most important thing I will say today. Like, we're complaining about ATACMS and this and that, but you can bet your bottom dollar the Americans will be giving the Ukrainians the technology to be able to make their own, the plans or whatever. They are going to be surely making long range missiles of their own to whack in these HIMARS GMLRS and to send them off and to have 100, 150-kilometer range. You can bet your bottom dollar, and that will be hugely important. The economic crisis in Russia, oil and gas revenues are declining drastically as they no longer have pipelines for transport. They are therefore dependent on ship transport, which is difficult to obtain and operate as no one wants to insure the cargo. And most shipping companies are afraid of being caught up in third party blockades and sanctions. Even China, after a 27% drop in European trade, has decided to reduce this, which means that they have to make concessions to Europe regarding support for Russia. The Russians' meaningless threats to the countries that are now sending us tanks, everyone already understands that it's a lot of noise and a little action. When you can't follow through on your threats, no one is afraid of you anymore. Exactly what I was saying earlier. The sad thing is, it's taken the West so long to realize this. We could have saved tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians if we had received stuff in September. We need fighter jets now and not later. I'm fully convinced that they will come maybe by April. Lots of talk about that happening, and the claims that they're already being trained up on that, etc., etc. Anyway, there's the news. Hopefully, that will inform the frontline update that will be following shortly. Thank you so much for your support. Please like, subscribe, and share. All the ways you can support the channel in the description below. Doodle Pip, speak to you very soon.